Welcome to today's webinar on the topic of skills for the new normal. My name is Victoria Granger and I'll be moderating today's webinar. And I am the founder of Wellness Force Canada. And if you don't know much about us, we really have a mission of building a healthier, higher performing Canadian population and economy, one organization at a time. So we are the first nonprofit workplace health and performance association in Canada. And we support both workplace wellness practitioners and employers in building healthy, high-performing work cultures. So our aim is really just to empower you with simple, evidence-informed, cost-effective resources and tools, education, and certification as well that bridges the gap between employee well-being and organizational performance. And if you did not know, our individual memberships are actually still offered at an introductory rate and have been extended that way just because of COVID-19, just to help support everyone. So they are actually only offered right now at about $100 per membership for a full year. And in a couple of weeks, that will also include the first of its kind, a workplace health and performance ambassador certification, which is meant for individuals who are, working in this industry. But the first level of certification that we will be piloting in just 2 weeks' time is really for anybody who wants to support employee health and organizational performance. And so we're really excited to offer that. It's pretty easy to use, self-paced, asynchronous process, and it really helps just give you the tools and the resources that you need to support, both employee well-being and organizational performance, and also gives you a bit of tailored feedback. So that's it for our announcements. I just want to go into the housekeeping a little bit. So this webinar will be approximately 45 minutes in length. We will have time for question and answers at the end. And if you can hold them till the end, that would be great. But if you're like me and you might forget your question, if you think of it at the time, go ahead and answer it into the question function, which you should see at the bottom of the screen. And we will save it there for you and bring it up at the end as well and have time there. Without further ado, I'm really excited to hear from our guest expert speakers today on the skills that employees and leaders increasingly need given the current and anticipated challenges that we are facing today. So we have Paula Allen. She is the Senior Vice President of Research, Analytics, and Innovation for Morneau Shepell. And in this role, she manages the whole continuum of integrated analytics, predictive modeling, and data-centric products and services that support the organization and its clients. So Paula's focus is on the current and emerging and most complex issues that have the greatest impact on workplace health, cost, and productivity. And she's also a well-recognized expert in workplace mental health, disability management, and drug plan management. So she's designed and led the most comprehensive employer response to the H1N1 pandemic and is currently Morneau Shepell's business response and resource lead for the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we also have Jackie Delphis, and she's an accomplished consultant with over 22 years of human resources and training and organizational development background. Her experience includes human resources, operations, and call center management with a specialty in learning and organizational development. As a senior consultant with Morneau Shepell, Jackie specializes in workplace mental health, thriving with resilience, leadership development, including and not limited to mental health in the workplace, respectful workplace practices, and change management as well. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to these two lovely, talented, brilliant ladies. Thank you and welcome, ladies.
Well, lovely, talented, and brilliant. How do we live up to that? So I'm thrilled to be here, and I speak for my colleague as well quite confidently in saying that Jackie and I are both happy to be here with you today. That's a pretty important topic. And there's a couple of things that we want to talk to you about. First, you'll see that we have some information on the National Mental Health Index. And we'll talk to you about that just to give you a sense in terms of what's happening right now. What are the challenges people are facing? What are the challenges to business performance that we need to be aware of now and in the emerging future? And also the factors that make a difference. So what can we focus on? What can we improve? How can we move forward? And how training has a role in that. So first, the Mental Health Index, and just to tell you a little bit about why this is important, not only for this time in COVID, but just in general, is we all know that mental health is a critical part of so many things that are essential to life. So for you as individuals, for businesses, the mental health of employees, for society overall, the impact that mental health has in participation in the economy and social relationships, it's tremendously important that there really wasn't a measure of it. And as you all would know, it's important to measure anything that is important. It's important to measure anything that you want to manage and influence. So this is why we had been intending to move forward with the mental health index, regardless of COVID-19. But as luck would have it, here we are, and we launched the first iteration of it right when we were all in the pandemic, which certainly gave us some interesting insights. So we did this in 4 geographies: US, UK, Australia, and in Canada. I'm going to be focusing on Canadian results right now. And it's a representative survey of 3,000 working Canadians. So we didn't look at people who were retired. We didn't look at people who were outside of the workplace. It was really people who are your employees or potential employees or former employees, as well as ourselves. And we developed it with a benchmark set of data in 2017, 18, and 19. And that was a period of time of relative stability, economic growth, and so we selected that as really our post. And all the results subsequent to that are measured against that post. So whether mental health is improving, as we all want it to be, or whether it's declining. And we will be going forward on a monthly basis, collecting all this information. So we have April already. May is almost ready to be released. And we are polling the same people over time, which is important because that helps us understand the impact of external factors on the same group, which is representative of age, industry, gender, and all those other critical factors. So moving to the next point. I'll tell you a little bit about how the index report is structured. So we have the index itself, which is basically that deviation from the benchmark, the 2017, 18, and 19 benchmark that I had mentioned. So essentially positive is good, negative is not so good. And we also have 2 other components. One is the mental stress change score. And what that shows is the month-over-month increase or decrease in mental stress for the population overall. So if there is a high number of the population, a large proportion that has increased mental stress, the number will be higher. If most people are the same or declined, then the number will be lower. And that's an important measure because it's a risk factor. So everybody has increases. The population is going to have increases. The population is going to have decreases. We expect it to hover around that middle part. But when you have continuous months, month over month over month of increases in mental stress, that's cumulative. And that is a huge risk factor in terms of long-term ability to cope as well as mental health. We also, if we have high swings in terms of the increase, that's another thing that we need to pay attention to. So all of this is to help us pay attention to what's important. The third component is really specific to what's relevant in the environment right now. So, we had contemplated things like, increase in real estate prices, increase in disruption in the workplace, political changes, all of those types of things. But COVID-19 beat everything out as basically the thing that's impacting, or we believe impacts people's mental health most significantly. So we did a spotlight on that, which I will share with you. So moving to the next slide here. This is important. So if you look at what this decline, so the pre-2020 benchmark compared to where we are in April 2020, a decline of 12 points is unheard of. So in the 3 years that we were collecting the benchmark information, significance actually starts at 1 point or in more at 2 points. That's why we start to pay attention. 12 points is massive. And just to give you a sense of what that means, where we are now as a nation in terms of our mental health is equivalent to the most distressed 1% of the population prior to 2020. So that I really want you to remember. It's important that we know that this is not just a blip in terms of our mental health. It's important that we know that this pandemic, most of us actually won't necessarily get the virus. We're doing everything possible to make sure that we do not, but most of us are being impacted in terms of our mental health as a result of fear of the virus and the impact of the pandemic situation overall. So this is an absolute call to action for individuals to be mindful of their mental health and to actually invest in it in a way that they probably haven't ever before, for businesses to do the exact same, because remember, this is the working population. These are people, these are your employees. So the fact that they're in distress also gives you a sense of potential long-term impact that we're going to speak about a little bit later with regarding to health costs, productivity impact, as well as disability risk. So moving to the next point, so you said I was very lovely and talented, but not talented enough to move slides in time. So forgive me for that. This slide basically gives you a sense of some of the drivers of the score. And the overall mental health index score is broken out down into different sub-scores. The biggest impact was basically anxiety. So, we've dropped in our ability to cope with anxiety. We are having increased anxiety, which results in that score. Depression was close behind. But work productivity was significantly impacted as well. Work productivity declined significantly from from the pre-2020 benchmark. And again, this is not surprising, but the size of all these declines is a bit surprising because they are so huge. And if you talk to most people, people are working pretty hard right now. Like, they're struggling to get things done. There's extra things that they're just doing as a result of the pandemic. But the question here was, as a result of your mental health, as a result of your ability to focus, has your work productivity been impacted? And the majority are saying yes. So again, very clear in terms of the business impact, increased errors, longer time to do things, but also the emotional strain that can lead to burnout when people don't feel that they are doing their best and they have more work on top. That is really a dangerous combination and one of the factors that can lead to burnout. Over on the right side, I'll just sort of bring your attention to the main driver of this change in mental health. So we did the analysis, we looked at all the different factors, and basically what we're finding is the concern over finance made the biggest difference between people who were doing extremely poorly in terms of their mental health and people who are doing a little bit better. So that concern about finances is something that we can't ignore. So when we're talking about supporting our people, we definitely need to talk about supporting their mental health and well-being and resilience, anxiety, depression, all of those things, all of those symptoms, helping them be able to cope. But also there is a call to action to help people with their planning and understanding of what their finances are, so there's a sense they can get back some control. A separate measure, and you'll see that in the bottom right hand, is a comment around emergency savings. And when we segmented the group, because we asked people who had emergency savings and who didn't, and basically anybody who had emergency savings was doing that much better, and very significantly, minus 23 points. Those without emergency savings were really doing very poorly. Like, this is one of the worst performing groups, worst performing indications. And that was regardless of salary level. So somebody who was earning, $100,000, $150,000 a year, which was in the higher end of the salary band, who did not have emergency savings actually was looking worse in their profile, regardless of whether they had their job or not, regardless of anything else. If they didn't have emergency savings, they were looking much worse than people who did, but who might not have been better off, as well off from an income point of view. So moving on. Oops, sorry. The other component that we looked at was the change in mental stress, as I've mentioned to you before. Now, this 74.7 is a calculation. What it really means is that we took the number of people who had increased mental stress, which was the vast majority. We took the proportion of people who had no change in mental stress. And we also took the portion of people who had a decrease in mental stress. And that third category was actually quite negligible. It was really evidenced in a bit of a rounding error. So we are, again, finding that month over month, there is this increase in mental stress, which is something that we will watch very closely, because as I said, it is another factor. It's a predictor of mental health. It could actually help us predict whether in the future we will see ourselves getting worse or better. And right now, it looks like we're heading towards not a great place, because we are seeing that increase in mental stress. I will note as well that there was a really huge difference between those who identify as female and those who identify as male. So those who identify as female were much higher in terms of their mental stress. Again, a lot of factors with respect to it, types of jobs, childcare responsibilities, but it is very noteworthy, and hence I mentioned. So at this point, I wanted to sort of share with you a little bit more detail around what people were telling us about the impact, the mental health impact of the pandemic. So this kind of breaks it down and gives us some insight into why we saw that massive drop, that negative 12%. It also sort of validates the increase in mental stress, but really look at how people are distributed. So about half of our population are saying that they are concerned about their mental health, but they believe that they're going to be able to cope. Another 32% are not sure that they're going to be able to cope. 7% feel in crisis. And just again, as a matter of comparison, in normal times, we would expect this to be about 1%. We also have another indication, because in our EAP, we're finding that there's been a 30% increase in suicidal ideation. But overall, what I want you to take away from this is 81% is clearly the majority of the population. So we're no longer talking about mental health issues as 1 in 5. We're talking about it as 4 in 5. And every single person here really needs to have a plan. So at the end of the day, even if you have that negative impact, but you believe that you're able to cope, number one, you believe, but you're not sure. So why take a chance with respect to something like that? Number two is, if you have that negative impact on your mental health, why would you allow yourself to feel more distressed than you absolutely need to? So having that plan around how you cope, what you do with your time, what your outlook is, and making sure that you reach out to get help, even if it is like a one-session contact with a counselor, so that you're acting, where the counselor is acting actually more as a coach, and how you can use your skills, participating in training so you can build your skills. Every single person has a call to action. Now, getting a little bit more granular, we also looked at very specifically what is causing stress. What are the actual factors in the pandemic that are impacting people's mental health? So this is where we're going specifically into our COVID section of our survey. And as you can see, the majority of people do indicate that the financial impact is really what's impacting them the most. It's really that worry, it's really that anxiety. And again, it's pretty much across the board. So even those who have their income, even those who have their jobs, you know, there's a general anxiety in the community right now. We're talking about the economy. We're also talking about household income. So you might be fine, but you might be concerned about your spouse's income or job. You might be close to retirement and neither of those things apply, but you're concerned about your retirement income and how that actually is impacted by the pandemic. So there's a plethora of things that are kind of involved in this number. But some of the other things as well, a loved one dying from COVID, that's a huge percentage, 43%. Worried about getting ill, personal anxiety, which we all should pay attention to now as we're talking about transitioning back to the workplace. People are still concerned about getting ill. A few other things, family relationships. And you might have heard, you know, a little bit in the news, and we've seen it in our results as well, about increase in domestic violence. Well, that is one end of the continuum, which is horrific enough. But if you see problems in one end of the continuum, there's pressure along the continuum. So, you know, families, you know, working all together in one home, not having the outlets that they did before, financial pressures kind of impacting people and perhaps how they interact with each other. That's all part of the concern that people are having right now. And next, I'll just give your attention to that overwork, overstrain. Over a quarter of people saying that it's a concern as well. So this is all part of, you know, being aware and having a target to build your resilience. It is a difficult time right now, and people are working harder because of more things to do in many cases. But also the other part of the component, as I said before, is when you feel distracted, when you're not able to kind of tap into your resilience, when you feel compromised, work feels harder. So the emotional impact of work, and there is some distress just because of that, coupled with, you know, the potential of having higher demands, is not a great formula. And it's certainly something that we need to invest in as a potential risk. Burnout is not pleasant, and certainly it is something that we see as a risk at this point. Okay. So moving to the next slide. This gives you an indication of the priority issue. So the number one concern, like if we really forced everybody to choose what was the biggest issue, there's actually two that stand out. One is the financial impact, and one is concern about a loved one dying. So just think about these things and how they impact people. People's financial resiliency is a huge thing in being able to feel comfortable and having a sense of well-being. Fear of a loved one dying, that's huge as well. There is a thing called anticipatory grief, where your fears and your concerns can put you in a grief state that feels close to what you would feel with the actual loss. So knowing about that, having a plan to deal with it, making sure that your mind is very focused on the things that you can control and not catastrophizing about the things that you can't, is all part of the call to action for each of us. So a little bit about why this is having such an impact on mental health. So again, it's not a pleasant situation to have a pandemic. No pandemic that I know of has been pleasant for anybody who has impacted it and been involved in it. But there has been such massive change for this one in particular. We've changed the way we work. We changed the way we shop. We changed our relationships and how we interact with other people. Our changes in terms of our sense of financial security, new fears coming up. Like, that's huge. And all of you would know that change is stressful, even if it's positive change. And most of the changes that I listed are not particularly positive. The other thing is that we weren't really prepared for it. Like if you expect a change to happen in your life, it will impact you. Like, you know, getting married, retiring, you know, whether it's positive or negative, it impacts you. If it's anticipated, it'll still impact you. But anything that's not anticipated, that feels out of control, will have a more significant negative impact. So this pandemic clicks all the boxes. And when we have something this significant, we do go through stages because we've lost our sense of predictability. We've lost a bit of our sense of control. We have that kind of shock, denial, and confusion, which if you think back, I know I certainly felt that in the very beginning, like, what is going on? Like, I don't understand this. Is this true? Is this real? And then you get into a stage where you understand it's very true, it's very real, it's not going away immediately, and then some negative emotions come up. And that, again, is somewhat normal. Frustration, anger, anxiety. The thing, though, is that even if you feel those things, you can't let them take over you. You can't let them define you. You can't let them prevent you from moving on to that third stage. So that's where we get into that short-term adjustment. And if you're not able to get into that short-term adjustment, if your people are not adjusting well, if you have managers who are saying that they are concerned about their people not coping, or they're starting to see some behavior change where the anxiety and frustration and anger is actually starting to define a person's personality and how they interact with the world, those are huge red flags. That short-term adjustment is going to make all the difference in terms of whether we actually move to longer-term adjustment or not. So in terms of that, the risks and the opportunities, there are definite opportunities here. So, you know, as I said, the risks in terms of staying angry, frustrated, not moving forward, not continuing even with your self-care needs, putting everything on hold, not having a plan about how you're going to cope with the personal disruption, how you're going to cope with your emotions, how you're going to cope with that big driver, which is that financial situation. Just taking one day at a time is actually not a good strategy right now. It is important to have a plan, and that actually is one of the components of building resilience. All of those other things are critical. All of those things are critical in terms of risk management. And in terms of your opportunities, doing the right thing, investing the way you should, really can help you come out stronger. You know, because every challenge that we have, just like every strain that you put on a muscle, you know, you can go one of two ways. It can either damage the muscle if there's too much strain and there's no recovery, or it can strengthen the muscle if you do the right thing. You're taking care of yourself and you're learning from your experiences. Then you can actually move forward much more significantly and in a much better way, which is what we all want. From a business point of view, there are definite concerns that we might have in terms of risks, longer-term risks for health and well-being. So if you look at your population overall, you can think about people in three categories. One is where people had mental health issues before, and that big risk there is when they're not continuing their care. They're saying things are different, I'm going to stop and I'm going to wait. Not a good idea. There's a part of your population who has mental health issues, but they really didn't have awareness of it. They're not in care. They might be coping relatively well, but this could be the tipping point. Another group, and this is where we all are potentially, where we may not have had mental health issues in the past, but the impact of the pandemic, the trauma that we feel, the grief that we feel, is the burnout risk. All of that puts us into a higher risk. So having a strategy where all of those three risk factors is addressed is an important call to action for you. On the other point, physical health issues might come up as well as part of your health and well-being risk. So people might not continue with their physical health self-care. We also know that, you know, working from home, if you have employees in that situation, some people are doing it very well. Others are not really doing it very well from an ergonomic point of view. That's a risk. That is something to pay attention to. These secondary mental health issues where people have a physical health issue, they might have had strain, they might have diabetes, they might have something else, but the mental health strain of the pandemic is that tipping point. So again, I really just want you to make sure that you understand that there are a number of risks as a result of this, directly from mental health, indirectly from mental health, and all of those are part of what needs to be considered in terms of the resources that you provide, the focus that you offer to your people, and what your next steps in terms of getting out of this quite well will be. So moving to the next point, just quickly, before I hand it off to my colleague, there's two sides of responsibility. So one side of responsibility is what we've all been thinking about, and all, if we haven't, that we should probably start thinking about a little bit more. And that's how an organization manages their people during crisis. So making sure that there's that sense of connection, making sure that there's clear lines of communication. Recognition is so important. Like when you're under strain, when people are not feeling good, whether you're under strain because of your overwork, whether you're under strain because you just are working in a risk situation, whether you're under strain because you're not feeling great, as many of us are not, because of the mental health impact of pandemic, your need for recognition goes up. Your need for that pat on the back increases. So that is something that we can actually build into our daily interactions with people, and managers can pay attention to. Prioritization is really important as well, so people are clear and they're not confused, and problem solving and honesty. So all of that is all great crisis management. Very specifically, given the impact of health and well-being on as a result of pandemic, really look at that holistic approach. And these are where you can offer resources. You can offer EAP, you can offer training, you can offer materials on mental health directly, anxiety and how to cope. Social health, which is important. You know, there is a sense of isolation. How do people make sure, even if they're living alone, how they reach out? And even if you're living with a house full of people, you might not necessarily have the kind of social interaction with friends that really feed you. So how to make sure that that happens, and how to make sure that it happens in terms of a colleague environment at work as well. Financial health we've spoken about, as also physical health we've mentioned before, activity, self-care. Manager support and manager training are really your best enablers to make sure that any part of your strategy actually lives, breathes, and works well, because your managers are the representation of you. So all of that, I'm hoping you can see that there are some things that employers should and can do to really address the situation that we spoke about at the beginning of this call, which really we cannot ignore. So we'll speak a little bit more in the rest of this section around very tangible things that we can do. So Jackie, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Paula. And we see some questions coming in. I'm going to pace us through so that we can get to your questions, because they are important. For this section of our time together, our hope is that you're going to step away with some tangible strategies, as Paula has mentioned. We're also going to share some trends that we're seeing and hearing from employers like yourselves around training and what we're hearing from employees. And then we're going to round out our discussion today around some topics that clients are finding very helpful in terms of giving their leaders a lift, their employees a lift, the business a lift as a whole. So with that, you know, we know that times are changing. We know that we're seeing a rapidly changing workforce. How do we keep up? How do we stay proactive? How do we stay customer ready? And more importantly, how do you keep your teams motivated? And if anyone has answers to all those questions, raise your hand now and we'll relinquish control and have you answer that. Because the fact of the matter is, we don't have all of the answers to all of those questions. We might have some of them, but essentially it is, you know, I liken this to a conversation that I had recently with a client that said, you know, Jackie, it feels like we're building the plane as we're flying it. And in that analogy, we know that there's opportunities for us. And some of those opportunities, we take a look at our policies. It's not that we have to reinvent our policies, but what we are seeing now is the need for us to update our policies. What's working? What's not? The truth is, what worked last month, or perhaps even last week, might not be working this week. So what do we need to put in place for our folks? We live in a world right now where we lived in a world where 9 to 5, for the most part, when we were coming in, was the normal. Then suddenly we had to shift. And now we're not coming in from 9 to 5, but we have had to adjust. So things are changing. If you take a look at some of the health concerns, how do we manage around that? How do we keep pace from what we're hearing from our healthcare leaders? How do we maintain healthy records? Most important, what we do know is that, and if you take nothing else away from what we're sharing with you today, it is critical that we have a positive vision of what your work world will look like. Doesn't mean it has to be unrealistic, but extremely positive. So what does that mean? This gives us an opportunity to address some questions and concerns. And I'll dig a little bit into each one of those buckets. Support your team members. And how do we do that? And how do we put in place these healthcare measures that we know is important? And in fact, it's the law. So some of the concerns that we're hearing, and in particular from leaders, is that they're feeling bogged down. They're feeling bogged down with a lot of these questions and things that are coming at them. And often these are situations where we don't necessarily have answers to. What we do know is that leaders can fix things. As leaders, you have the capability to, here's a situation, we analyze it, got it, what do we need to do, and we move on. What we're hearing now from leaders is some of these questions that they're faced with, we don't necessarily have an answer to. For example, your loved one, their loved one just got furloughed, or perhaps they've lost their job. They've lost a parent in a long-term care facility. And the leaders have these things dropped at their feet. So how do you respond? How do you respond in a situation where someone isn't playing by the rules? And so as an organization, we are quickly moving to fix these issues as they come up. What we've heard and what we do know is that what people want from their leaders, what they want from you is really that unshakable commitment to your values and principles. So what does that mean? It truly means that as an organization, we have our values, you have your mission, and we must stick to them. But more importantly, what we're hearing from a lot of our clients right now is the need to lead with compassion, to be vulnerable. So when we are looking at these situations, it isn't a matter of, okay, got it, let's move on. It is, what we're hearing from leaders is the need to build that side of their skill set that isn't necessarily something that they have to, they use. Compassion is huge. The need for trust. We do know when it comes to leadership, you have two things in your toolkit, what you say and what you do. Everything that you say has an impact, good or bad, and everything that you do has an impact, good or bad. But if I take us back to that vision for the future and just hope and inspiration, what employees are looking for right now is a sense of here's where we are and here's where we're going. So how do we implement these strategies for our employees and provide that vision for them that is meaningful? So how do you lead with empathy? So we've all heard emotional intelligence, listening actively, etc. But how do you truly listen with the intent to understand? And what we do know is that you've got to hang out in that empathy phase. And empathy is not sympathy. It's not, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I feel sorry for you. It is listening, reframing, and then giving compassion. In these cases, what we do know is statements of understanding must always precede statements of advice. Some practical things that leaders can do and what we've seen with success is having social meetings. On the flip side of that, some of you might be hearing the whole Zoom fatigue, perhaps some of the issues that we have with too many meetings, becoming bogged down. So encourage breaks. What we do know and what we are hearing is that the best analogy is we're all going through this thing together, but we're all in separate boats. So one employee's boat might be floating and doing very well, and another employee might be taking on some water. So how do we move forward as a team in a way that we can do that without your leadership being bogged down? And that is where we teach those leadership skills that's important to keep moving the business forward. Trust is key. Paula talked about this in her notes as well. So team leadership is important during this time, and what we're doing and research does show that trust is critical. It's a critical part because how can you engage in trustworthy actions with your employees and stakeholders? What are some of those key things that you can do? If you don't have the answer, it's okay to say we don't have the answer at this time, and we will get back to you. So for what we do with our training is we have 3 distinct audiences that we focus our programs on. From a senior leader's perspective, we know that it's important to build that vision. How are we going to get there? What are we going to do? That empowerment that you see that you need to build that creative future for the organization. That big picture leading in time. So there are a couple ways that you can do that. Some organizations take a top-down approach. I liken that to perhaps Bell Canada and what they did with Bell Let's Talk. It was a solid commitment from the leadership level all the way down and then marched all along to get that done. Another option that can be used is perhaps a town hall where you get all employees to buy in, somehow perhaps the majority of the employees to buy in, and build a vision and create the new normal going forward. For the frontline leaders, we do know that this, if you think about anything else that you will do from a training perspective, it's support for the leaders. So what are some of those practical things that we can do and arm the leaders so that they can keep the business moving? So we do know that they have to manage up and they have to manage down, and they're still managing their own life in between. What we're hearing also from leaders is that they have more meetings than ever before. They are faced with situations that they don't have the answer for. So we teach these practical skills that they need to manage through. And from an employee perspective, it really is providing them with awareness training. When it comes to our training with employees, we take what we call a dual accountability approach. So we can put practices and processes and policies in place. It really is up to our employees to take advantage of them. So how do we do that in a way that we can measure it and have it impactful? A few options that we have certainly curated for you today, and there's a couple more that I'll mention. We have a program that's called Through the Looking Glass: Thriving in the New Normal. And this is a training that is focused on, if you think about the audiences that I mentioned previously, frontline leaders, senior leaders, and employees, different programs. So different options that we use to deliver this training. And here we teach really practical skills that leaders will need to adjust in the new normal. How to have those conversations, how to manage these tough situations, and how to build those empathetic conversations that's really important to keep the business moving. How do they not get bogged down? The mental health and well-being, coping and resilience focuses on just that. What are some of the things that we're hearing now when it comes to mental health? And it's not just about the disease states and the stigma that we're hearing, but right now coping in these difficult times. So what this program does, it certainly unpacks real practical strategies that leaders, employees can have during this time. Childcare is another trending issue. There's also financial as well. Or Ask the Expert program. It is and all of these programs, I should pause and say they're delivered virtually. They can be, and they're all customizable and flexible to meet the unique needs of your business. The Ask the Expert is just that. if you need someone to come in perhaps and answer some questions that you might have, perhaps share some, deliver some training around key topics. You know, we talked about finances, we talked about parenting, we talked about how do we work mobile. And it could also be, we're just trying to figure this thing out. Can we have someone come in and answer some questions for us? Again, very flexible program, all delivered virtually. And most importantly, and we can share with you the information that we have here, is our Queen's Mental Health Leadership Certificate Program, and also a very good tool that we use, that we support organizations with globally. So I'll pause there, and I apologize. I certainly talked a lot faster than anticipated, just in the interest of time. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Victoria, to perhaps ask any of the questions that you have coming in, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Thank you so much, ladies. That was great. There's so much valuable information that you shared there. At the beginning there, when you were talking about how, you know, it's no longer that 1 in 5 people who need support for their mental health or who are experiencing mental health problems, that it's more now like 4 in 5 or 4 out of 5 or 81%. That's really quite eye-opening. And yeah, we need to be able to have some of these tools and skills to share with them. So thank you for sharing that. So I did have a question here. About, and I guess it's related more back to you, Paula, about if people are actually coping better working from home over time. I don't know if you saw that in the mental health index that you did or not.
Well, that specific question we didn't look at, but we are looking forward. One of the reasons why we're doing this on a monthly basis is that we do expect to see some diversity. Some people will start to be able to cope. People will start to be able to adapt. But then there's also people who have issues which will continue to be exacerbated. So we will be separating that out going forward. Specifically on the issue of working from home, it's a really interesting thing because even if you take our organization, for example, I mean, we pretty much immediately were able to get into a state where 96% of our population was able to work from home. We have a flexible workplace culture to begin with. We have a lot of digital tools. We were delivering e-counseling, and we were delivering virtual services just as a modality choice to our population. So we were able to move quite quickly. What we found and what was important for managers to pay attention to is that some people adapted quite well. Some people were better, like things worked much better for them. They were more productive, they were happier, they felt less stressed as a result of working from home.
Uh-huh.
There were others who really didn't. So there, you know, there's people just on your personal circumstance as well as your personal preference and way of being where it's not optimal. And as we're kind of thinking about how we move into the next stage, this is where it's important for managers to really understand what's going on with each of their team members and check in a very honest and authentic way about how things are going. And don't give those kind of silent messages that you expect the answer to be fine. Like really, you know, look for little signs that things are not going okay. Look for signs and listen if they're going wonderfully. You know, we have to understand what's happening with our people, because I think that'll inform what we should actually do going forward, just in terms of the work structure, but also when the manager actually needs to step in and help encourage somebody to get additional help.
Yeah, that's a great point, Paula. The hashtag get real, right? When you're doing those check-ins to find out how people are doing. And I anticipate, and from what I've seen from those that I've been working with, is that, yeah, usually those who have kids at home are struggling a little bit more, right? When they're not in school, then they don't have a day home, that kind of thing. So it'll really vary. So it's important to know. I do have another question here from Nathan. He says, besides education in the forms of watching training videos, what else can be done to support and engage employees?
So Jackie, that sounds like that's one for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are a couple of ways that, and thank you for the question, Nathan, that's a good one. A couple of options that we see that are trending right now is around training, like what we're hearing is bite-sized learning and really sort of short snippets of the learning activities. There is in webinars, I know you mentioned outside of the videos, there are video training options that we have. We have our microsite as well that we can, that has information that's accessible for employees and employers alike. Does that answer the question, your question, Nathan?
I'll see if we put a response here. Sounds like it. I did have another question from as well. It said, Paula, can you comment on any best practices for benefit design during this time to support employees? And yes, that question answered.
Yeah. I think the best concept around benefit design is actually look for what's going to have the most value to your people. Like that's just generally the starting point. And also making sure that there is flexibility. So, you know, the nuance of what people need is important. So if you look at it from a high level, the information that I have from a number of different sources says that we really do need to step up and prioritize mental health access in our benefits design. That had been happening over the last little while already. So, you know, one thing would be, opening up paramedical coverage. The other would be, paying for interventions that are digital, where people can have, more in-depth mental health service. So EAP is one thing, and EAP is gone digital. That's being delivered by all providers in that way. But some of that more in-depth service, we don't want to have that group that I had mentioned who has mental health issues or people who might move into that group and they're more significant in nature, not have what they need. So this is where tools like, virtual care, this is where tools like, internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy, having that as part of what you're very clearly communicating and what's very available to people is quite important. The other thing is that very unfortunately, I think we are all needing to prepare for multiple waves, like not even second wave anymore. Like we're talking about possibility of multiple waves of pandemic. And we're also talking about a shorter period of time between this and the next pandemic. So with that, there's going to be a heightened level of anxiety around people, having face-to-face contact. It's going to be likely a period of time where we go into a lockdown or semi-lockdown situation again. Even the psyche of people is going to be, I really want to see my friends and my family, and I want to go back to the movies and the restaurants, but I don't want to have otherwise unnecessary contact because I'm comfortable just making sure that I don't expose myself more. So again, digital services, telemedicine, all of that is so logical right now, given the reality that we're facing, that I do think that we have to look at it from what we need now and build going forward as opposed to what we might have done before and just like.
Yeah, great points. I think, the takeaway with all of this is that we people need extra support, and having that plan to be able to support them is so important, and to be able to set both your employees and your organization up for success at the end of that. I'll just leave one more minute. Does anybody else have any other questions that they'd like to bring up? We do have the Q&A function there, and the chat function. You could use either one. But in the interim, maybe Jackie, if you'd like to just move to the next one, just so that people have the contact information for you guys regarding your training. Those are all really great options and support that you have available. So I encourage you to check those out and have a look at them. They're all really well thought through and great programs. And the fact that they're customized is obviously very helpful to be able to support different audiences as well.
And also here, Victoria, we do have a catalog, a microsite that's COVID-19 specific with some free options as well that you can consider, or some of these topics that we talked about as well. So we're happy to share that afterwards if that's helpful.
That would be great. Yes, I will follow up with everybody who attended and everybody who registered to provide the information here, so the contact information, and I can also provide that link for that other resource with for individuals who were attending here as well. All right, I don't think we have any more questions. So I want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar on this really important and timely topic. We learned some great information, and I think, again, the key takeaway here is that obviously employees are needing, and everybody is needing support with our mental health moving forward due to this demand and the increase that, you know, and the stress that the pandemic has been causing. And so I hope you all can use some of the resources and the information that was shared today. And I also just wanted to mention at the beginning, I did mention that we did have the certification program that is launching right away. So if you're interested in that, and you are, you know, you're working in this space of workplace health, and you want that some extra tools and support, you can either email us at info@wellnessworkscanada.ca, or just go to our website. We also offer employer memberships that can support organizations with a third party unbiased assessment and audit and tailored recommendations in a strategy session to help support you moving forward as well. So I again encourage you to check out and email workplacelearning@morneaushepell.com for all these great training opportunities, and also wellnessworkscanada.ca to check out the other support that we could offer you here. And lastly, I just did want to mention that we do have another webinar coming up next week on June 3rd with Lori Castleman. She's a CEO and CRO of Wello Virtual Healthcare, and she'll be talking about the return to work plan and how to make that transition smooth for employees to support their mental health. And then on June 10th, we'll also have Brandy Payne with us, and she's a consultant and former Associate Minister of Health in Alberta. She was responsible for the mental health and addictions portfolio, and she'll be talking about just some really small but practical, impactful things that we can do to improve mental health at work, both for employees and for leaders. So thank you very much. We will be following up with a survey and some, again, the links to the resources that we mentioned today. So I wish you all the very best, and we hope to see you soon. Have a great week.